Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to talk to you about something that I learned years ago, about 3 years ago now, from a project that Google did, and it was how do you have an effective meeting. Now, anyone who works in corporate world will know meetings, and just in case you missed it, we're going to have another meeting about another meeting for the meeting that's tomorrow to make sure we have the meeting planned for the meeting. Get it? We have lots of meetings. And I remember sitting there in numerous meetings in my young stage of my career going, what is the point of this? What is everyone doing? What is it I'm missing that, what was we were meant to get out of this meeting? And I'd be sitting there going, I hope everyone knows what this is, because they all seem to be knowing what it is, and I had no clue. And one of the things I have now learned as I've moved on, and obviously through this thing that Google did, which I'll talk about in a minute, was what is an effective meeting and how do you know if you've had one? So today I'm going to talk to you about the Project Aristotle that Google did and what that helped me understand and how to change things. And then I'm going to give you 3 tips on how you can make sure you actually have an effective meeting and what that means. Right, so let's get started. So how do you know if you've had an effective meeting? So if you think about what a meeting is, it's a gathering of people that come together to talk about subjects, talk about questions, to maybe talk about some actions or make a decision. So if that's what it is, it's a coming together of people of different viewpoints, different opinions to talk about a subject or subjects and to come up with some sort of action plan. That's the point of a meeting. So naturally there's got to be a message. There's got to be people in there who have either the authority or the input or the opinions that matter for this message and for the actions that need to be taken. But one of the things I often look at when I go into these meetings, especially when I've got dozens of people in the meetings now, of course with working from home, you might have 20 people on a Teams meeting or a Zoom call, is how much is that meeting actually costing? And I remember back in my very early career, I was working at a law firm where I knew all the rates of all the partners and the senior lawyers, etc. And I remember sitting there in a meeting because they ran their meetings to the minute. But their cost was, I sat there as I was sort of listening as they were chit-chatting, and I worked out it was costing over 10 grand an hour of internal cost for this meeting based on what their rates could be. And it sort of struck me then that the meeting started at 9. By 9:02 the door was closed and locked, and anyone who tried to turn up wasn't allowed in. And the agenda started. And the agenda went, right, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, etc. And they went through them, and each one kept to its time limit. And by the end of the meeting, by 9:55 or whatever it was 2 minutes for questions, and literally it was questions for 2 minutes, and that was it. And then at a minute or two to 10 o'clock, it was pack up and out the door so that the next meeting could start on the time at 10 o'clock. And I'd never seen a meeting run so effectively. I thought, oh, these must just be lawyers because they're all paranoid about getting their 6-minute charges in. But what it actually was they had realized the cost and the effectiveness of meetings, and that meetings cost $10,000 an hour for that particular meeting. So what was it Google did? Because obviously Google, being who Google are, they did a huge study quite a few years ago, and they called it Project Aristotle, and they wanted to understand why certain groups and certain teams were more effective than other teams. And so Project Aristotle, they wanted to understand what made teams effective and what made other teams not so effective. What was that secret sauce in the success of these projects and success of these teams? Was it people? Was it the project that it was? Was it money? Was it time? Whatever. So they looked at over 180 teams across the business and tried to figure out what was going on and what was making them successful. And they looked at personality types. They looked at the different skill ranges. Were these accountants? Were they lawyers? Were they marketing people, HR people, etc.? They also looked at their experience levels. Were these new grads? Were these 20-plus year vets? Or were these 5-year, recent grads? And what they found was that the mix of all those things had zero difference on the productivity. They had teams which had PhD holders in them, where who'd been working in their certain careers for years, and they were not being effective. And then they had teams of grads who were being more effective in comparison, who had no experience and less of a degree. What they found was that the who in the teams actually had no effect. So what actually did have the effect, and what they found was actually it was the group norms were the success factor, and what really came out as the biggest success factor was psychological safety within those meetings. And what that really comes down to was the fact that people in those teams felt safe to talk, they felt safe not to talk, and they felt safe that their ideas, their questions were going to be listened to properly, and they were not going to be viewed as being stupid or irrelevant or not to the point of what the meeting was. So they felt like they could actually talk. And so what that meant was that you didn't get people feeling embarrassed. They didn't feel like my comment at the beginning where saying, I hope everyone actually knows what this is for. There was none of that. It was you could ask that question. And that psychological safety was key in the success that they found within Project Aristotle. So how have I used that to then help me through my career and hopefully help you guys learn something from this? Was I took that, and one of the things they did in Project Aristotle was they were marking off, when they were doing sort of some of the observation to see who's being successful, was they marked off meetings where they wanted to see who was talking and who was talking for how long. And when I was working at a business, we used to do big board meetings, and there'd be 20 plus people in the room. And I sat there one day, and in this meeting I happened to be taking the actions, and I thought, I'm going to document who talks. And so I wrote on a piece of paper all the different people around the board table, and I started ticking one tick after every single person's name to go, right, I want to see who talks. And what I got at the end of this, and I did this numerous times, but basically the study showed exactly what the Google Project Aristotle study had done, was there were only 2 or 3 people talking in every single meeting. Even though there were 20 people in the room every time, there was only 10% of the people did 90% of the talking. And it really got me thinking, going, actually this is the norm. And since then, years on, I've now to sort of subconsciously keep an eye on meetings, and you'll see if you've in a meeting where there's only 10 or 20% of the people in the meeting actually talking, no one else is saying anything, why are they in there? What's the value to them? What's the value to the meeting? What's the value to the business of these people being in there? Now, that value might actually be really high, which means you're missing out on that value, or it's actually they're not valuable to be in there, and it's just a cost, and it's time wasting. And that is a completely different subject that we can talk about at another time. But how do I run my meetings is what I want to try and get through to the rest of YouTube and all the people, is what I took from Project Aristotle and doing some of my own observations with seeing who's talking, was when I run my meetings, I keep 3 key things in mind when I do it. And the first is completely, will come at no surprise, have an agenda. And send it out before the meeting. And enforce the fact that it needs to be read, and that's what you're going to follow. And if people say, I didn't have time to do it, I'm sorry, but that's your problem. We're following the agenda, and if you didn't prep and you didn't look at the questions that were going to be asked, then next time you don't need to be in this meeting. And I'll often be very blunt in meetings with people like that to go, here is the agenda, these are the 5 topics that we're going to cover, this is what we're going to look at, and what the things that we need to be thinking about, and these are the actions that we need to take. So that when you go into that meeting, it's not a 5 or 10 minutes recap of what this meeting is for. People come into the meeting knowing what it is about. And it's very clear and concise. The agenda was sent out, it's going to be read, and this is what we're going to follow. So naturally, that means then when we come to the next bit, is the timekeeping side. And again, it sounds obvious, but Microsoft just released some studies on their global Teams usage with COVID over the last 12 months. And the average Teams meeting has increased by, was like 15 or 16%, which means that a 30-minute meeting is now going to 36, 37 minutes because people aren't keeping to the time. And so one of the things I always try and keep on top of is obviously the agenda, but the agenda has a time frame to it. And if we say we're going to talk for 10 minutes on a topic, we talk for no more than 10 minutes. You can always talk for less, but you can't talk for more. And it might sound obvious to everybody, but one of the things I do with that timekeeping is I keep it in front of mind with everybody. Right, this is 10 minutes of talking for this. At 10 minutes we're stopping. If we still have more questions or more topic to be talked about, it's going to go into the agenda for the next meeting, because obviously it needs further talking about. And by doing that, you keep that focus on people not to go off on huge tangents. Is that when we're talking about Project A, and Project A in terms of budget, we are talking for 10 minutes on budget for Project A and nothing else. It doesn't mean we then talk about how Project A is affecting Project B's budget and now we need to talk about Project B. It's Project A and Project A only and its budget constraints. If an action item comes up that we need to see how it's affecting Project B, that's done, and that's for the next meeting. We don't cover it now. So it's really having that consistency and that that view of, we are going to cover this, and that is all we're going to be talking about, and we'll take action items for other things, and keeping to that time. And what that then helps to create is that back to the agenda item is, we are keeping to the agenda, and that means timekeeping too. The other one, again, that I've always now covered from seeing that Google study of Project Aristotle, is everyone in the meeting must speak. Now, I'll caveat that, obviously, if you're just having a big team meeting where you're talking about certain things, absolutely. I mean, if you've got a team of, say, 60 people, you're not going to have everyone sit there and talk, necessarily. You might just be, a couple managers are doing some presentations, or someone's doing a team presentation on what they did for the last 6 weeks. But if you're having a very specific meeting where there is an agenda and you're going to be talking about specific actions, everyone who is in that meeting must contribute. Because if you're not contributing to it, then why are you there? And again, a lot of people will feel quite confronted with that message, and it is quite blunt when you say, well, if you're in this meeting and you're not contributing, then why are you wasting the 30 minutes or the 60 minutes of sitting there just listening? We can just send you an email with, here's what we spoke about, here's the agenda, and here was the action items. And that will take you 5 minutes to read instead of sitting there for 60 minutes. And once you get that message through to everyone, that everyone must speak, and that's not just a, yes, I agree with what was said, you've got to actually contribute to it. So again, with that timekeeping thing I talked about, where I'd mark off who's talking, oftentimes if I'm running a meeting, I keep a mental cap. And again, if you're working from home like I am most of the time, just have a little pen and paper on there and just mark off when people talk and kind of go, oh, look, Bob, you haven't spoken, and Jane, you haven't spoken. I want to hear from you, and call them out. And don't just go when they say, oh, I've got nothing to contribute. Go, well, then, so was the meeting a complete waste of time for you? If you've got nothing to contribute? We've just talked about, the problems we're having, or the ideas that we've thought of, and you've got nothing to contribute. Then why are you here? Now, again, I'll caveat that you don't necessarily be that blunt with them in the group setting, but you do call out the fact that what is it you want to add, and get them talking. I mean, an example I have of this is, there was a lady who I worked with who was fantastic at her job, really a technical guru, but didn't like talking in public. And later found out, some of it was cultural from where she was from and how she was raised and grown up. Being a woman, obviously, and me being a man as a boss, she didn't feel it was appropriate for her to talk. But I changed that with her going, I pin her out and go, right, Jane, what's your views on this? And after a while, it got to the point where she was out there doing public speaking, because she had a lot to say. She just never felt that it was appropriate for her to come out and speak because of how she'd been raised and all the cultural values that she had. And she felt, well, no, the boss is talking, let the boss talk. I don't want to talk. I want to hear what you guys have got to say. And once I got that through to my different teams, the collaboration that you see, the ideas that you see coming out are just fundamentally different to what you'll get when a talk is dominated by only 10 or 20% of the people. So, to wrap up, how do you know you had an effective meeting? To me, it's those three key things. Have an agenda sent out that everyone has read and understands. You stick to that agenda. You stick to the timekeeping. You make sure everybody speaks. And at the end of it, you have your actions, which are then followed up and done for the next meeting as part of the next agenda. And then that way you start to keep your tally up of what you've been doing, making sure things are actually getting done. And you don't just have meetings for meeting's sake. It's a really clear, concise piece. And if you think about it, how much does a meeting cost? You've got 6, 7, 8, 20 people locked in a meeting for an hour. Do the numbers. Work out what the day rates are for everybody and go, right, that meeting cost us $5,000. Did we get $5,000 back of value on that? Or did we get more than that? Or did it lose or cost us more? And if everyone's busy, as we all are now, what was the point of that meeting if no one got value out of it? It didn't actually solve anything. Start having those sort of honest conversations with yourself. Test it in your meetings. See what you get out of it. Do the tally of who's talking and how they're talking, and see how you can maybe influence your own meetings by sending out an agenda, keeping to it strictly, keeping to the time strictly, and making sure that everyone actually contributes properly. Anyway, with that, I hope you enjoyed that. Again, like I've said, I'll be doing a few more of these, and we'll see how we go. Have a great day.